Happy Pride, my lovely friends. I hope you are celebrating being your very, very truest self. We celebrate Pride every day on this channel, but this year I feel like it is more important than it has been in a long time to celebrate Pride as a community. So I wanted to jump in and be a part of the celebration. If you don't know who I am, my name is Taryn Tyler. I am a poet and a pet sitter, and the author of the Gothic lesbian fairy tale Snow Roses. Gothic books have been queer for a very long time. Um, Back in the day when it wasn't safe to talk about being queer, Gothic books were one of the few places that people were able to explore and give voice to their experiences. So I wanted to share just a couple of my favorite Gothic queer books and why I think they are amazing. So we will start with Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's possibly a French last name. I know the author was English, but this story tells the story of a young girl named Laura and her guest Carmilla, who may be more than she seems. They develop a very close relationship, and meanwhile, there are villagers dying and they don't know why. I've heard it said before that Carmilla has a sapphic subtext, but reading the book, it doesn't really feel like a subtext to me at all. It feels very, very much direct. It feels like a direct sapphic story. Let me read some quotes to you. I have been in love with no one, and never shall, she said, unless it should be with you. And then the narrator says, how beautiful she looked in the moonlight. And here's another one. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me, hating me through death and after. It really doesn't seem like subtext to me. I think the only reason that it didn't bristle a lot of feathers back in 1871 when it was first published is because most people back then just didn't acknowledge the fact that sapphic love even existed. And so it either went over their heads completely or they just didn't feel threatened by it. It wasn't illegal to be with another woman back then because people just didn't want to talk about it. And so they would just ignore it and be like, no, you're friends. No, you're not lovers, you're friends. And so people would read this story and just be like, yeah, they're just close friends who swear undying love to each other randomly all the time. That's what friends do. The sweetness of the relationship, like the intense sweetness of like first love, really, really did remind me of my relationship with my first girlfriend, where it was just very young and innocent, but also it was, everything. There's nothing else in the world that exists. The version of it that I read has an introduction by Carmen Maria Machado. And I learned in the introduction that the story is actually based off of two real girls who were kind of pulled apart. Their names were Veronica Housel and Marcia Morin. So Veronica and Marcia were two teenage girls that were really in love in the 1870s, and their father and a doctor pulled them apart, and that's where the inspiration for this story came from, which to me is very, very sad. It definitely gives the story like a bittersweet background of knowing that this fun story to read is based on two girls whose lives were basically torn apart because someone didn't approve of what they were doing. So even though the story was written in a time when it wouldn't have been acceptable to talk about sapphic love, and it did, the end of the story does still feel a little bit of a cautionary tale, which again gives it a bittersweet flavor in my mind because I enjoy the story. It's a good book and it's an important part of queer history because it's a testament that people have been queer forever. They have always been queer. This is not a new thing. And it was really very daring at the time for, I'm going to forget his name again, Joseph Sheridan LaFou, to write the story, but at the same time, the attitude towards the story was not what I would want it to be. I would love for there to be a modern adaptation, either a movie or a retelling, where we get to see more agency in Laura and her relationship with Carmilla is portrayed in a more positive light. Bonus points if it has a happy ending. So the next classic queer Gothic novel that I am going to talk about for you is, and this one is not going to be a surprise to anyone, A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I think most of us know the story of Dorian Gray. He's a young man, very beautiful. There is a portrait of him that takes on not only his aging, but also his inner corruption. So every time he does something immoral, something wrong, something that hurts others, the painting gets corrupted, but he comes out scot-free. He is not harmed at all. It's really a story about privilege if you think about it. The Picture of Dorian Gray was written by one of my favorite authors of all time, Oscar Wilde, who was sadly imprisoned for sodomy and died only a few years later from an injury he got while he was imprisoned. When I went to Paris in 2019, one of the first things on my list was to go see his grave. And it was really moving to see all the lipstick kisses that are all over his tombstone, because just like Veronica and Marcia, Oscar Wilde was torn apart from his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. And it was just sad but moving to see so many people who admire him. Obviously, he is deserves every amount of literary acclaim he has, apart from what his own life was like. But I mean, he ultimately died because of who he loved. At the time, he was buried beside unbaptized children because people wouldn't bury him on hallowed ground. But now people flock to his grave to celebrate him for who he was and just having the bravery to stand up and be himself. So there's a lot of gay undertones in most of Oscar Wilde's stories, including his fairy tales. But The Picture of Dorian Gray has a very clear gay, I don't know if I'd call it a subplot. I think it's part of the main plot. Basil, the painter who painted the painting that takes on all of Dorian's shame, is very, very obviously in love with him. And I would even argue, even though it doesn't say this outright in the book, that the love that he put into the painting is what made it magic. And the big tragedy of the story at the end, spoilers if you haven't read it, is that as Basil watches Dorian become more and more depraved, and this person he loves just descends into this dark hole, and he's the only one who's like, no, come on, like trying to pull him out of it and cares about him in a real way, and he ends up hurting Basil the most. And that's really the deep tragedy of the story. It's not a happy story, but it is very good. Unfortunately, a lot of the classic Gothic novels with queer elements do not end happily. It probably would have been even harder to get something published back then that had queer joy in it. Which is why I am glad that things are different now. And okay, if you've been following this channel at all, you probably know what I'm about to pull up next. The third book that I'm going to rave about is Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. This book is the perfect book. It is so good. I cannot stop talking about it wherever I go. It's told in a series of letters and journal entries, etc., like Dracula the original, and we follow 3 different plot lines. Lucy's journal leading up to when she was bit by Dracula, modern day Lucy's therapy transcripts as she describes what she's been up to since then, And then there's a modern mystery that seems like it's unconnected, but obviously it is. And I love this book for a lot of reasons. Um, but one of the core reasons is that Lucy in Bram Stoker's Dracula is whatever the opposite of the final girl is, right? Mina Harker, she's the not like other girls. She's the one who's pure and virginal. She's the one who's just exactly what a woman should be. And Lucy's just pretty because the reader isn't supposed to care about Lucy as much. She dies first. That's just to show how dangerous Dracula is, so that it can feel really important as the heroes get together to save Mina, who is the girl you're supposed to care about. So I really loved getting to see Lucy being given a second chance at happiness because she matters too. And the story is just so beautifully written. It has a really, really sweet, empowering lesbian romance. It has a really awesome kick-ass girl squad of other deemed by society to be less important girls who are just like, no, we all matter. It deals with a lot of themes of self-love and learning to process past traumas, and it is just it is it is good. Everyone should read this book. It is amazing. Not to mention it is beautifully written and has that, like what I've talked about in some previous videos, that like more literary style, slow crawl, darkness creeping in the backdrop type of Gothic vibe that I really love in my stories. There's a podcast I listen to sometimes that does interviews with authors, and one of the questions he always asks the author at the end is, what book do you wish you wrote? I don't wish I wrote Lucy Undying because then I would be deprived of the joy of reading it. And there's just an experience of reading a book when you don't know what's going to happen that you will never have with a book you've written. But if there is a book that made me feel everything that I want my readers to feel when they read my books, it's Lucy Undying. Which brings me to, and you can take this one with a grain of salt, obviously biased recommendation, but Snow Roses by me. It is a Gothic lesbian retelling of Snow White and Rose Red, in which two girls are hiding together in the woods until they give each other the strength they need to go and face uh, the darkness outside. Content warning, there are some things that I've drawn from some of the older versions of Sleeping Beauty, specifically one that's called The Sun, the Moon, and Talia, in which the kiss is a much darker thing. So if that's a trigger for you, please take care of yourself. Gothic books have had queer elements for such a long time, and I think largely because they are books that explore things that are taboo. And for so long, being queer has been taboo, that it has been one of the few safe places to explore those kinds of themes. Fortunately, things are getting better, and we can have books like Lucy Undying with queer joy in them, and where the queerness is presented as a positive thing. But unfortunately, there are legislations pushing back on that, trying to keep those books out of schools. So I hope that people continue to write and read more and more queer books so that those voices continue to make themselves heard. And even if you're not queer, I recommend picking up a queer book every once in a while just to see some other perspectives. I think reading is one of the ways that we are able to share our perspectives with each other and really learn empathy for people who are different than us. And if you have any recommendations for books, they don't have to be Gothic, but that's a plus, that show an experience that's different than mine, please recommend them. I would love to know more books to read that can broaden my perspective on the world. And if you are queer, I know the world is really scary right now for us, but whatever your sexuality, gender expression, You are worthy, and I am proud of you. Happy Pride.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to Ink Spills if you enjoy fairy tales, Gothic literature, poetry, book recommendations, or writing.